This isn't about rebellion, and it's not about being heartless either. It's about the quiet moment when you realize that staying connected was costing you more than walking away. You didn't cut off your family in anger. You did it after years of explaining yourself, shrinking your thoughts, swallowing comments, and leaving every interaction feeling smaller than when you arrived. You didn't wake up one day and decide to disappear. You slowly stopped answering. You delayed visits. You kept conversations surface level until even that felt exhausting. Eventually, distance stopped feeling dramatic and started feeling necessary. Let's say this clearly. You didn't leave because you're weak. You left because you were tired of managing yourself for other people. From the outside, it looks cold, ungrateful, extreme. People assume something must be wrong with you to make a choice like this. But on the inside, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like relief mixed with guilt, peace mixed with something unfinished. You're not proud of the distance, you're just able to breathe inside it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You didn't cut them off because you can't handle relationships. You cut them off because you handle too much. You notice patterns others ignore. Emotional pressure disguised as concern. Subtle control passed off as love. Unspoken rules about who you're allowed to be. And once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. This is where most people lie to themselves. They call this drama to avoid calling it precision. And if this feels uncomfortably accurate, ask yourself why distance felt safer than honesty. Most people tolerate emotional friction for the sake of belonging. They absorb it, normalize it, and call it family. You didn't. And that's not because you're weak. It's because something in you reacts faster and more honestly than average. You feel pressure early. You notice shifts before they become explosions. You register the cost before others admit there is one. You pick up on emotional undercurrents. You sense when concern turns into control, when advice becomes expectation, when love quietly asks for obedience. Where others adapt, you analyze. Where others numb themselves, you stay alert. That awareness is useful, but it's also heavy, especially in environments where silence is rewarded and honesty is treated as disrespect. So when people say, family is everything, it doesn't land the same for you. Not because you reject connection, but because you reject performance. You don't bond through pretending, you bond through truth. And when truth isn't allowed, distance becomes the cleanest option. Let's say this clearly. You are not difficult. You are precise. Most people would rather be accepted than be real. You chose the opposite. That choice costs you comfort, but it also protects your core. You're not easily guilted, not easily programmed, not easily pulled into emotional roles that don't fit who you actually are. Here's the uncomfortable truth. This trait doesn't make you superior. It makes you responsible, because awareness without intention turns into avoidance. Discernment without courage turns into distance. If you keep calling withdrawal strength, ask yourself what kind of life that strength is quietly building for you. You didn't wake up sensitive, you became precise. Over time, you noticed that what people said didn't line up with what they meant. Support came with expectations, praise came with conditions. Love existed, but it wasn't neutral. It leaned, it pulled, it asked without asking. At first, you tried to adjust. You chose words carefully. You softened reactions. You learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. You weren't trying to be difficult. You were trying to stay connected without triggering consequences you couldn't predict. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You learned that closeness had a cost. Your nervous system adapted by becoming alert. You read tone shifts before words finished. You tracked facial changes. You anticipated reactions to avoid conflict. That awareness protected you. It also drained you, because closeness now required constant self-monitoring, and safety depended on staying one step ahead. This is where most people lie to themselves. They call this being mature, when it's actually survival. Eventually, your system did the math. Distance reduced pressure, silence reduced correction, absence reduced the need to manage yourself. Cutting off wasn't dramatic or impulsive. It was a regulation strategy. Your mind chose peace over performance. This is why explaining yourself never worked. You weren't unclear, you were accurate, but the environment you were in couldn't absorb that accuracy without losing control. And systems don't change to accommodate truth, they push it out. So you stepped away, not to punish anyone, not to prove a point, but because staying meant staying split between who you were and who you were allowed to be. Now ask yourself this: if distance became your solution, what part of you never learned how to stay present without disappearing? Distance fixes one thing fast. It removes pressure, it gives you room, it quiets the noise, and for a while that feels like winning. You finally feel steady, untouched, in control. But the cost doesn't show up loudly, it shows up slowly. Socially, you become harder to place. People feel your boundary before they understand you. Some respect it, others keep their distance without explaining why. Invitations fade, not because you're unwanted, but because you don't fit easily into people's emotional maps. You're not rejected, you're undefined. Let's say this clearly: being undefined is not the same as being independent. Relationally, you start carrying everything yourself. You protect your peace so efficiently that almost no one gets close enough to disturb it. Conflict drops, so does intimacy. Conversations stay clean, controlled, and safe. But depth needs friction, and you've trained yourself to remove it early. You're calm, but you're rarely challenged. And over time, that shows. Here's the uncomfortable truth: safety without engagement turns into emotional flatness. Then there's the identity cost. When distance becomes your default response, it stops being a choice. It becomes a reflex. You start equating strength with needing less, with explaining nothing, with staying untouched. Quietly, your emotional range narrows, not in a dramatic way, in a manageable way, a way that feels fine. This is where most people lie to themselves. They call this peace when it's actually maintenance. The danger isn't being alone. The danger is staying unchanged because nothing ever gets close enough to move you. If distance solved the past, ask yourself what it's quietly preventing you from becoming now. Here's the brutal truth: cutting people off will never give you closure. It won't heal the wound. It won't make the past suddenly make sense. It only stops the noise. And silence can feel powerful when you've lived in constant tension. For a while, it works. Your body calms down, your mind feels cleaner. You stop bracing yourself. That relief convinces you that distance equals resolution. But relief is not repair. It's a pause, and pauses end the moment life asks more of you. Let's say this clearly: silence doesn't resolve patterns. It freezes them. You don't escape the dynamic. You just stop activating it. And that feels like growth until intimacy returns, until authority shows up, until someone needs something from you. The same reactions resurface because the pattern was never integrated, only avoided. Here's the uncomfortable truth: if this trait stays unconscious, it becomes a cage disguised as freedom. You won't be controlled, but you also won't be fully known. You'll keep your independence, but you'll quietly limit how close anyone can get. Not because you lack depth, but because your system learned to equate closeness with cost. So it shuts the door early and calls that strength. And the deepest loss isn't connection, it's authorship. When boundaries become your identity, you stop choosing. You start defaulting. You don't ask what you want to build. You only ask what you need to avoid. This is where most people lie to themselves. They call avoidance empowerment because it feels clean. So here's the question that matters: are you protecting your values, or are your boundaries protecting you from ever being tested again? You already know distance works. It gave you breathing room when nothing else did. So this isn't about undoing that choice or pretending it was wrong. It's about what happens after distance stops being a tool and starts becoming an identity. When this trait is integrated, it doesn't disappear. It matures. You stop cutting off automatically and start discerning intentionally. You still protect your inner world, but you no longer confuse absence with strength. You decide when to engage and when to step back, without rehearsing explanations or carrying guilt afterward. Let's say this clearly: strength isn't how little you need people. It's how intentionally you choose them. You become someone who stays present without performing. Someone who can remain in a room without shrinking or posturing. Your boundaries stop being visible defenses and start becoming quiet facts. You don't announce them. You don't enforce them dramatically. They're simply there, and people adjust. Here's the uncomfortable truth: peace that depends on isolation is fragile. Real stability shows up when your presence doesn't collapse under pressure, when you can tolerate friction without disappearing, when you can say no without vanishing. That's when your nervous system stops running the show and starts supporting you instead. This kind of person doesn't chase belonging, but they also don't avoid it. They understand that not every connection deserves access, but some deserve patience and calibration. They're no longer reacting to what hurt them, they're choosing what fits them. This is where most people lie to themselves. They think sovereignty means standing alone. Sovereignty is being able to stand with others without losing yourself. The question is no longer who you had to cut off, it's who you're capable of staying with now.